The issue of errors is a complicated one. First of all, what's an error? Is an error, is it simply that something isn't done correctly? That's an easy way to put it. Incidentally, without a content task analysis, are you really in a position to say what's correct and what's not correct? You can see how some of this stuff begins to tie in. One of the really fun things about this system is, you know, you're rolling along and you've got this little piece and you're working on this and this, and all of a sudden you see how two of them come careening together and connect. How can you say that's wrong unless you have spelled out what's right? If wrong means that the person did not perform a function that you had defined as correct, what does it mean? Could it mean that they don't know it? Sure could. Could it mean that they don't know, that they do know it but they don't care? Sure could. Could it mean that they know it and they care, but something happened that just blew it? Sheltered workshops and work activity centers have gotten so many of their contracts from the garbage can that a lot of times an error is that the materials are no good. We call that an error. Whose error? I was in a sheltered workshop one day where a man from industry, we have some funny ideas of what that means, by the way. That means they know all the right stuff. Baloney. We can out-design those guys, most of them, not all of them. A lot of bad job design in industry. A lot of good ones too, but more bad ones. Guy from industry comes in and he's got these plastic knobs for something. And he wants to give 100,000 plastic knobs to the sheltered workshop to be sorted to get out all of the defects. Certainly they can do something like sorting out defective knobs. Well, what's a defective knob? Oh, there's a few things. See, this one's scratched, and this one has a chip off of it, and this one has a this, and he gave us, here, these 7, here's 30 of them, these 7 are the bad ones, see? And I'm looking and I don't see. You know, I'm really looking and I hear him talking, you know, but boy, and we're all checking things out. So I took my pen, very inconspicuously, and I reached down into the hole in the knob and I put a little pen mark inside at the bottom of each knob. And then, in a very klutzy fashion, I slipped a little bit on the table and knocked the entire pile back together again. And said, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. Excuse me, would you please sort those out again and let me see the bad ones?" I think 3 of the ones he picked out of the 7 were ones that he had picked before. The other 4 that he picked before, he didn't pick this time. He picked 4 other ones. He didn't have any more idea of what was a good knob and a bad knob than the man in the moon, and yet he was ready to walk out of there and then have the retarded blamed for doing a bad job of quality control. So that's an error, huh? Not theirs, but it's an error. We do that kind of stuff real frequently. We shouldn't allow that. That's not good business and it's not fair. And when we do that, by the way, does our paycheck go down at the end of the month? No way. But they don't get paid because the company wouldn't accept the job. Okay, so we can't give you money for that. The way we look at errors, it's arbitrary, but it works. We say that when a person is on their way to criterion 1, Any error that they make is interpreted to mean they don't know it yet. So when a person is working at a task, a new task, until he gets whatever we decided criterion one was, 10 correct cycles without assistance, or or whatever, or 50 correct decisions, or whatever. Any minus, any incorrect that shows up, we basically interpret it to mean he doesn't know it yet. When he gives us those 10 in a row correct, that's our way of saying we assume now that he knows it. Now, there are obviously exceptions, okay? If the person is about to do something and an airplane comes through the window and he gets it wrong, then we say, well, that isn't because we won't call that because he doesn't know it. There are lots of exceptions, but basically that's the interpretation. After criterion one has been reached, and the person now goes either into criterion two conditions or into production, or whatever, and that is, we say he's got it, and now he's doing it. Not in a new situation where there's more learning going on, but let's say that he learns how to put all those resistors in the circuit board. We now have him on the production floor, and he starts in, and basically he's not making any mistakes. The new environment hasn't brought in a lot of new stuff to him. He's rolling along. And he makes a perfect board, and a perfect board, and a perfect board, 40, 50, 80, 100 things. And then we see an error come in, or some errors come in. When we see errors after criterion one has been reached, we interpret those errors to mean something other than he doesn't know it. And I'll cover what those are. Once we've made a decision that he knows it, then we accept that. And then look at errors and make a decision of what to do about it based on some other hypothesis than that he doesn't know it. Now, the exception to that is that if we find people making a whole bunch of errors after criterion one, that usually means we better take a better look at what we decided criterion one was. And sometimes that happens. When you're real anxious to get rolling in production, and you're a shop that has instituted one of the procedures we recommend, which is that nobody be allowed in production until they have first reached criterion. Then sometimes you'll say 3 in a row correct, because we really got to get rolling. And for a lot of people, 3 in a row correct, that might be fine, and they might just go cook. But a lot of people, they haven't even had a chance to accidentally guess wrong yet. Okay, 3 in a row correct on a lot of simple jobs. There are 3 accidental corrects. Okay, they really haven't even started really getting into what's going on yet. So sometimes, if a lot of errors start showing up, you may have to back up and say, I don't think my training was good enough, and I don't think what I accepted as criterion one was stringent enough, was strong enough, and I'm going to revise that. All right? Okay. Now let's look at those two interpretations. I'll handle the second one first, and that is when a person is in production. He has shown you 10 in a row correct or 50 in a row correct, and now he starts working, and errors start popping up here and there. What you have to do is you have to look at the errors and make an hypothesis, a guess as to why. Here are some guesses. The conditions have changed. The parts are different. It may be in the task itself. It may be that we were using bond paper before, and now we're using a different kind of paper, and it just, the set of motions that we'd built in, now that this is smooth paper, it just doesn't fit. Yesterday, somebody's task analysis, they had brought the paper over and they were just holding it with their thumb and letting go and coming back over here. Well, with real smooth paper, they'd lose it. It would, when they come down, it would just slide away. You've got to hold it better. So sometimes the reason errors crop in later is because of something inherent. A real common one is where you have tools that need sharpening. That's a real common one. You've taught them the correct thing and everything, and stuff starts going wrong. Your drill bit has gotten dull. Your screwdriver has gotten rough on the edges, and it doesn't fit in the slot. Or you went out and bought 600 screws that work just fine for training and everything else. Now you've got to go out and get more screws, and the slot is a little bit narrower, and the screwdriver really doesn't sit down in there the way it should. They're now using the wrong tool. It's the same tool as it was before, but it's not the right one for the screw. And in the meantime, you have screws breaking and things not going in tightly and other stuff like that. So that's a possibility, that you look at the conditions or at the task and things have changed. A second possibility is that the motivational aspects of the situation are causing the errors. The guy says, "This is junk. What do you know, yeah, I know how to do it, but who needs, plunk, there's one for you, and plunk, there's one for you. But who needs it?" Well, if your decision is that it's motivational, then, like I said yesterday, look to the reinforcement end of the bag. Now, that's very complicated. For example, just how reinforcing do you have to be with a severely non-reinforcing task? And sometimes you can't come up with enough. All right? You want a guy to clean a toilet in a colostomy ward of a hospital. I'm trying to pick a tough job. Okay. How much reinforcement would it take you to do that job? Okay? So a lot of times you're really up against it. A lot of times what you have to say to yourself if you're hypothesizing a motivational problem, and this is a really valuable question to ask. It's a hard one, but it's important. If he's got any dignity in your mind, all right? Somebody ought to ask the question, is he right? That's a hard question. But sometimes what you find is, if you'll just stand back and look a little bit, is you're going out for these huge, powerful reinforcement systems to force someone to do something that nobody in their right mind, see? Nobody in their right mind would do. But since you've already decided he isn't, then of course you can come up with big, powerful strategies to make him. Another thing, if you're hypothesizing that the errors are motivational, it may be that what you think is a motivational system is not functioning as one. You're using praise. And we'll talk about that when we get into the reinforcement stuff later. You're using praise, and the way you're using it, it doesn't mean anything to him. I'll give you a feeling of that and show you what I mean. We do this. I wasn't going to really get into the reinforcement stuff yet, but I've got so much stuff to cover that maybe I'll slip into a little bit of that now. Let's say that I came over here, and I, in the process of my talking things, I said, "That is a very, very lovely dress that you're wearing today, even though you've covered it up with that thing that you're wearing there. It's really, really lovely, and I noticed it this morning." And then I go on ahead, and I get into some other stuff. She's sitting there saying, "God, there's 400 people in here, and gee, that's really kind of nice, man, And I go on along, and I come back, and I say, I really like the way you did your hair today. It's very functional, and it's up, and it's all tied up in there." And I said, I go away in there and everything, and we're going along, and then I come on back, and I say, "Okay, God, those are nice shoes." She's going to say, "God, he should have stuck with the dress." Geez, when he came out with the dress, that was, gee, but God, if it's so free, it must not be worth anything. What's he trying to get? Who does he think he is? He's trying to manipulate me. All right? when you sit there, good, I like that, thank you, here's some more phlegm in your mouth, and on and on and on, the person is sitting there saying to himself, my God, if she would just be quiet a minute, maybe I could think what I'm supposed to be doing here. Or the person is saying, that stuff can't possibly be worth anything if it's coming out like that. And so if you're looking at motivational systems, don't think that praise is motivational, that chocolate is motivational, that money is motivational. Something is motivational when it's motivational. And almost anything that is at one point, under some other circumstance, is not. All right? And so when you're looking at motivational systems, and a person is having errors or real low productivity, you've got to look very carefully and very closely. If you have a pay system, and part of your use of that pay system is to provide motivation, aside from meeting Department of Labor requirements, then it's very important that you have a specified program for every single person that ensures that they genuinely understand the relationship between what they do on Tuesday and what they get on Friday. Some of your clients are sitting there, they're saying to themselves, whatever I did on Monday, they didn't like it. And on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, nobody liked it. But what I did on Friday, boy, they really liked it. You know? So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to bomb it out. And Friday, man, I'm going to work like the devil because on Friday they do something for me. Okay? I bet there are people that do that. You need the kind of a system, and this is just typical behavior modification procedures, that starts out with an immediate contingent thing. You do this, you get this. This is for some people. Other people just walk in and they got it. You do this and you get this. And then that eventually converts to you do this and you get this. And then you have to do this and this and this and this. And then you do this, 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 and this, and hold on a little bit, and then you'll get this. And then you have to do all of this, then you have to wait, then you get this. Then you have to wait, then get this, which doesn't look like anything, which then gets you this, which is really useful. Okay? Like a checking account or a savings account. Savings account reinforcing for anybody? Not me. I have a perfect relationship between what I make and what I spend. A lot of your people that go home to their folks or to the place where they live with a piece of paper that they can't read and never see again, you're calling that a reinforcement system? Hardly. Okay? Now with somebody like Mary, who said, what was she going to buy? A tape recorder. Remember? She said, I put my money in the bank. And then I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get her now. Why? And she's ready for me. Because I want a tape recorder. Now that young lady on Tuesday is sitting there motivated for the tape recorder. So she's got it. Either she did it herself or somebody did it for her. They brought her on through the sequence to see, like the rest of us, how that operates as a motivational system. But for a lot of people that you have, it doesn't do it. They don't understand it yet. Not until you do it for them. Another hypothesis as to why a person has started to make errors when you're already sure that they know it is that something has happened to interfere. Could be motivational, but could be other things too. How many of you have, sometimes in the summer and sometimes in the winter, it's 92 degrees in your workshop and people are wearing coats? That's not fair. And of course they're supposed to produce, right? How many of you stop all of the production? You know, it's 10 o'clock, it's time for language development. Stop being a worker and become a student until 10:30 when you're supposed to become a worker again. And the guy comes back to work and he's just been with a very efficient, effective, good person in language development who has him really involved in a bunch of stuff, and he's supposed to just turn it all off and go back to work. That can make errors start. By the way, my recommendation, and I mentioned it a little bit previously, I said that I didn't think that anything should happen but work where people work. I would prefer that all of the other stuff, all the other kinds of training, and I think that agencies that are sheltered workshops, I think it's a perfectly valid decision to have a lot of other training that you assume responsibility for. I also think it's perfectly valid to ask a totally different agency to handle all of that. So I'd go either way on that. One workshop that we work with has absolutely no habilitation personnel whatsoever. What they do have is they have a red telephone on the shop floor or just off the shop floor. They have absolutely no rehabilitative services whatsoever, only work. And that telephone connects to a social worker in another agency where the people that work in that sheltered workshop know that any needs that they have, and they're the ones that have to decide that they have them, they just pick up the phone and make arrangements to go see the other agency. It's also an integrated workshop. There are normal workers and severely handicapped workers, and nobody asks who picks up the phone. So there are sometimes normal workers who use the phone too. My recommendation is, if you can do it, provide some distance between where you work and where you learn other things. If you can't, I still wouldn't do it on the shop floor. No way. If it has to be in the same building, I guess that's life. Secondly is I would avoid circumstances where a person has to leave and return to work for those other kinds of things. Sometimes that's very difficult to do, but I would try very hard to avoid it. One suggestion is that those things take place in the evening. That's a hard one. A second suggestion, which isn't as hard as you might think, is that everyone in the workshop has a 4-day work week. And day number 5 is spent in all of the other learning activities. For instance, your workshop has 80% of its staff every day. And each day, 20% is on a non-work day. On Monday, 20% of the clients do not work Mondays. They have Mondays off. Mondays are spent in classes and other kinds of things, learning transportation, self-help skills, daily living skills. On Tuesday through Friday, those people work. Tuesday is a day off for another 20% of the workers. And on that day off, they go to school and do other kinds of things. Another possibility is that some of the individuals, half of the individuals, begin work at 10 o'clock. They arrive at the agency at 8 o'clock, have classes, and work begins at 10. And the other half, and this is a kind of difficult strategy, the other half have a work day that goes from 8 until 2, and from 2:15 until 4, they go to school. But I would try to pull away and separate out those different environments to give them more of a chance of coming to grips with what's needed and expected in those respective environments. And I think that a lot of the things we do now for the sake of administrative convenience come back in the form of confusion, errors that don't need to be there, low productivity, low expectancies, and other kinds of things. I think a lot of those are really organizational. They have nothing to do with them at all. Okay. Another interpretation of errors in production are errors after it's being done. By the way, all the things that I'm saying apply just as much to non-work things. A person that you have taught to put on their pants, and they do it reliably and consistently for a while, and then they start slowing down or having trouble or not getting them on right in things. The other thing is just plain old random fluctuation, which is what you find a lot of times in industry too. Sometimes an error is just a flick of the eye, folks. And if you attach too much importance to it, you've lost it. Sometimes an error is just an error. For example, if we really had high standards for the workers we're talking about here, we would find out that just like us, sometimes they just have a bad day. Right now our standards are so doggone low that we confuse their occasional bad day with all the rest of the bad days that we have foisted on them. So that's another possibility. Now let's dig a little harder into errors. Different theoreticians have suggested different things about how people learn. The old SR psychologists, Thorndike and Hull and some of those people, they say that we get little tiny bits and pieces that we get in there and we keep adding them together and get more and more and more. We talk about, Hull talks about habit strength, and Guthrie talks about I forget what the units are. But other people, like the Gestalt psychologists, they say, no, what we do is we start with a big undifferentiated mass of information, and we gradually put cracks in it and make it finer and finer and discriminate further and further what the pieces are of it. Those are sort of opposite ways of looking at how people acquire information. My guess is they're both right for different kinds of information. And there's a bunch of other ways of looking at it too. I wish there was time to really go into all of these theoretical positions, because they are very valuable for conceptualizing what that guy's doing there, but there's not the time to delve into the theory. But we can talk a little bit about practice. Don't overlook the statement I made that when an error occurs, the trainer has to establish an hypothesis. That's extremely important. When somebody does something wrong, your reaction to them, and I shouldn't use the word wrong, I should use the word incorrect. When somebody does something that's incorrect according to what you've defined as correct, your reaction to them is a reflection of why you think they did that, or what you think is actually going on. If you sit back when they make a mistake and wait to see if they'll self-correct, you're obviously hypothesizing that they didn't have enough information to get it right, but they've got enough information to realize that it's wrong and to do something about it to get it right. You're putting a lot of faith in what's in there, and sort of saying, when you stand back and wait, you are sort of saying, I think you've got almost all the information you need. Because if I just wait a minute, you're going to fix it. That means you first know that it was wrong, and secondly, you know what to do about it. At the other end, if you take a person and totally bring them through every single little bit and piece of it without giving them a chance to move a muscle or make an error, you obviously have an hypothesis that says, I don't think he knows a single thing about this. So those are the two ends. I will totally do it with him, whether it's one step or all the steps. I will say to him, put your hand here, and I will do it and all that. No chance for anything from him. Or, when he makes an error, I'll just wait and see what happens. One assumes he's got nothing, and the other one assumes he has almost everything. Not quite, because he did make the error. Then there's everything in between. That's where it gets tricky. It's not tricky to start out and run him through everything, and it's not tricky to sit back and do nothing hoping. Okay? What's tricky is every other option between those. Now, we talked on the film today about the rule of self-correction. We talked about the rule of diminishing feedback, which suggests that when you decide that you do in fact have to correct, how you can control the amount of information you give. Now I'm talking a little more about timing. Okay? Let's separate that out. The rule of diminishing feedback talks about the power of your feedback. Okay? I've never quite said it this way, and I like this. The rule of self-correction has more to do with the timing of your feedback. The first part says, allow self-correction only when you think more will be learned from completing the mistake than catching it in progress, and where the mistake will be obvious to the learner. A lot of times I'm working with people who are learning to be trainers, and I accuse them of having what I call the Jewish mother syndrome. That's where I'll correct the error before he makes it. God forbid he should hurt himself. Sometimes the person hasn't even made a decision yet, and you're already in there fixing it, because you know he will. All right? Now the Jewish mother syndrome, which you won't find in the technical dialogue here, what that is when a person actually is standing in the way of learning occurring by not allowing any decision on which to base assistance. So it's possible, when you're controlling the timing of what you do, if you're too quick, like if you take a pretty capable person and totally put them through the task, you're wasting time. They don't need that. What they need is to find out what's right and what's wrong by getting in there and doing it and getting feedback. All right? So you don't want to correct too early. Now I'm going to give you all this, and you're going to say, God, my head's swimming. You've got to go back and think about this, and you have to try it and plug. These are the things you plug in there that come flopping out second by second when you're training, remember? And one of them is, how's my timing coming? Am I jumping in too quick? Am I taking too long? Okay? The timing of your correction is a critical issue because we don't have a lot of time. What do we have? 12 years, 15 years, 18 years, 20 years? We have a guy for a few months, whatever. We have a contract that needs to be gotten out. We have a family that's thinking of institutionalizing someone because they're so difficult to have at home. We have a budget that isn't what we'd like it to be. There are a lot of reasons why, like, for instance, our clients and students and the people we work with are anxious to get along with existing and having a nice life. There are reasons why we want to be efficient. We don't have an unending resource. So if you jump in too fast before a person has made a decision, you may have avoided a moment where they could learn something. If you sit back and let them get something wrong without any idea in the world as to why or what or whatever, and your cycle goes completely out of cycle constancy, you may have to back up and waste a lot of time. What you want to do, if you can possibly do it, is to make good decisions about when to step in Now, we've already talked about, with the rule of diminishing feedback, ways of stepping in that control how much power, how much information you use when you decide to use it. We've already talked about that. Now we're saying, with those decisions floating up in there, we add another dimension to the decisions. And the first one says, if you're going to allow a person to make an error. Now I've got to put this in. I've already said to you, sometimes like with verbal responses, you have no choice. You've got to let it out. You've got to let the person say it. But with a lot of manual kinds of tasks, you have a lot more control. If you're going to allow a person to make errors, it should be because you think there is enough stuff in there to benefit from making that error and just standing back and waiting. You're saying to yourself, this is going to be a fine piece of learning here because I hypothesize he's got enough stuff there that he's going to say, oh yeah, okay, and you've got it. What that means usually, especially if you're working with people who find it difficult to learn, is that you're in the later stages of the learning. If a person is in the early stages of learning, they're working on a task that they really don't know very well at all, then chances are you want to be more rapidly available with assistance because you want to keep them moving through and experiencing correctness. You don't, in the early stages, usually assume as much stuff in there to have as a base for helping themselves decide. So you're there stronger at the beginning. It says, when these conditions cannot be met, provide feedback after a decision has been made, but before it has been acted upon. Again, with manual tasks, it's very often that you will see a person begin a motion, begin an action, and it's clear from the way they begin that they're on the way to a wrong one. For example, if they have a unit that they're assembling, and they pick up a part and look at it, and it's in their hand upside down. If they turn it over and start to move, you see a correct decision on the way. If it's upside down and they start to move, you see an incorrect decision on the way. What this rule says is that one place that's a valuable place to catch learning when you can, a good piece of timing, where you can do it, is to catch it after it's been made, but before it's been acted upon. That's a very nice place to get it. If you catch it too late, you have to back the cycle up. If you catch it too early, they haven't made a decision, so they don't know what you're telling them. When it's over here upside down, if you say try another way, for example, they may not have even gotten to the point of making a decision to know whether or not they were going to make a mistake. We did a study, a 5-year retention study. We went back to some individuals that we had not seen or worked with in 5 years to see, and it was with the bike brakes, to see if they remembered. We went into the agency and they hadn't seen us or the task in 5 years. And I happened to be there the first day, and we sat down with Ed Wenger, a very, very strange fellow, about 50 years old, reminds me a lot of the executive director of the agency. And he came in, and he looked around, and he looked at the table, and he said, "The bicycle brakes." And he sat down, and he picked up the axle, and he picked up the first part in his hand, and it was upside down in his hand. And he looked at it, and he started to smile. He said, "Try another way." And he turned it over, and he put it on. After 5 years, he not only remembered his lines, he remembered ours. Incidentally, the 5-year retention study, we got highly significant results for all subjects. Basically, what it said is they remembered. All right. The third part here says many errors, for instance where the response is verbal, cannot be observed until they've been made. For these, the rule of self-correction cannot be applied. There are a lot of situations where you don't have the option of timing. You just don't. But for a lot of other situations, the issue of timing is one of the most valuable things that you can plug into the clinical part of you. You've got all of these other tricks in the bag of tricks. And now we have these rules which sit there all the time and come out like that, and timing is one of them. To the extent that you are able, become increasingly conscious of the exact moment when you provide assistance or help. There's an interesting thing to be said with that, by the way. Behavior modification technology is a fairly expansive and effective and useful technology. I think I said this the other day. They really don't cover this issue of timing. There's nothing in the operant literature that really talks about the exact moment of stepping in. It talks about shaping and fading and scheduling. But in terms of the really intimate and intricate decisions about exactly when to smile, or exactly when to touch, or exactly when to provide, that's something that really isn't covered. Not in any fine detail, it's not. And so here's another one of those parts of where we're saying all of the technology must integrate with all your feelings and clinical judgment. Never get rid of that. Just keep adding more and more reliable stuff to it. What I'd like to do is I'd like to take a few minutes and do something that I've never done this before. Okay? It's a sales pitch. Okay? You can shed all the ideals we've been talking about and stuff. I'm going to sit here for a couple minutes as a businessman. And sorry. There are a lot of really fine things going on in the United States and in other countries towards the goals that we have, that all of us have, for meaningful existence for people who have not had one. You've heard me throughout the conference mention, and on the films and in the presentations, you've heard me mention Lou Brown and Ogden Lindsley and other theoretical positions and things. There are a lot of people. There is no way that anyone could accuse me of believing that we've got the only stuff. Or that we've got answers and things like that. And there are a lot of people that have a lot of very valuable stuff. At this particular time, we are tooling up and have already developed some mechanisms that we think are going to be very helpful to help people reach their goals. And by we, I'm talking about our corporation. And as I say, it's the first time I've tried this, but I've decided to take a minute, and it really is a sales pitch. It's exactly what it is, so you need to know that before I start, so that you don't confuse it with the rest of what I've done, which is certainly not intended to be a sales pitch, except in a totally non-capitalistic kind of a way. We have developed a number of things that we think may be valuable resources for you. Let me start with the ones that are not it's a sales pitch, but it's a free one. You will find in the materials that you have my address and phone number and a list of all of my publications. Those materials are available free. We have not sold any materials. The task analyses that I said were available in California are provided at a cost of $1 each, and I'm not sure we're going to break even on that. That's intended simply to replace the paper and the postage and the stamps and that stuff. We have tried to design our cost on that stuff so that it is not an income-producing thing, so that it pays for itself. All right? So the first thing is, and this is the freebie, is that the telephone number there should be a resource that all of you have. At any time when a question comes up or something comes up that you think I could answer or a member of my staff could answer, just call and we'll try to answer it. And that's a service. That's a service that was there a long time before the corporation was there, but it's a service. I feel a responsibility to every one of you here that if I cause a lot of questions to be asked out there, I ought to be around to help answer some of them, and I wish to do that. Now let me talk about some other things. We have been operating in California now for 1 year. It's a contract that is between Marc and Associates and the Departments of Rehabilitation and Health of the state of California. It's a 2-year contract. It was issued for $800,000, and it was to provide intensive instruction on task analysis over a 2-year period to individuals in each of at least 4 agencies in each of at least 7 different regions of the state, and to train them in 3 skills. Number 1, task analysis. Number 2, training and using those task analyses to train a wide variety of people with various kinds of handicapping conditions. And number 3, to train those individuals in the training of other people in those 2 skills. It's a ripple effect. And we expect within the 2-year time to have the second ripple. And that is, the contract calls for us training one group and proving their ability to train others by having that first next group completed. We're right on the money and things are cooking. We are now negotiating contracts in a variety of places and have other things beginning, which really are various forms, takeoffs on the basic theme. The basic theme of providing full-time staff, corporate staff, in communities where there are several agencies, where the responsibility of our staff is to take, for instance, people that have the knowledge base that you have from this conference and giving you long-term, ongoing, but finite, 1 year or 2 years, finite instruction with criteria built in to make you very sophisticated task analysts and to help you use that to affect revisions and changes in your agencies. Let me tell you a couple other things that I think you'll find kind of interesting. One thing is that we're doing workshops like this. I'll tell you what we find with workshops like this. We find a very good cost-benefit ratio. We find that many of the people, not all, many of the people that attend a 3-day session like this will go back and make some positive changes. Some people will go back and not make any. And there's no critical statement there. Okay, the last thing I think, and I'll get into this afternoon, I'm not sitting here saying I'm going to change everybody. I'm going to make everybody different. No. I have some things that I think are useful and valuable. I have no trouble respecting people who get to the end of this and say, maybe so, but I didn't see any. And I think that that's people's rights, okay? But there are some people that go back and really make a lot of change. And some portion, and I don't really have a good handle yet on exactly what that is, we have evidence that says maybe 10 or 15 or 20% of you people will go back and make really major significant change in what you do with your clients and residents and other people you work with, and what happens to your agency. And if we get a hit rate of 10% in a conference of 400 people, then 40 agencies are going to really do a lot because of what happened in 3 days, and that's worth spending the 3 days for us. Okay? We also realize that the number of individuals that can sit and listen to some guy talk for 3 days and watch some movies and can go back and write sophisticated, clean task analyses, that number is not going to be real large. That everybody should do a lot better job of planning and stuff, but there's a lot to doing task analyses. And so what we have entered into, And while there are certainly economic reasons for doing it, that was not the basic intention, and still isn't, is these longer-term relationships that we expect to have an 80 to 100% hit rate of people after a period of a year or so having very, very sophisticated skills in training and in task analysis, and also political skills, which is probably the best word to use there, for being able to capitalize on that to help agencies grow. We don't go in with our own hidden values saying we want an agency to have this as a goal and that as a goal. It's not our place to decide what the goal of an agency should be. It is our place to tell agencies that they ought to have goals, because a lot of them don't even know what they are. And we will say to people, we really can't train you to accomplish your goals if you haven't decided on them yet. So we think you should, but we can't say what those goals are, because what it takes to make it in Kashkanong is a lot different than what it takes to make it in Milwaukee, okay, or in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Very different. Okay. You might be interested in one of the contracts we're generating right now. Someone came to us and said, I own 2 shoe factories, big ones. I have a 14-year-old son with Down syndrome. I live in a large city, and there are no meaningful services for adult retarded persons. We would like your corporation to create them. And the backing will come exclusively from industry and from banking interests in our city. We are willing to put up an institute and create a large organization. And I said, I can't do it. If there is no organizational structure in existence, then the last thing I'd ever want to do is create one. Why don't I suggest an alternative for meeting what you seem to have as your goal, which is meaningful existence for your son and others like him where you live? I said, why don't we create instead, let's not spend any money on buildings. Let's spend all of the money you guys want to spend on staff and on things like advertisements, television commercials, other kinds of things. Let's create a labor force of trainers and community change agents. Let's go to where people exist and do things there. For example, let's take individuals and train them to deliver a very powerful training program to every bus driver in the city. So that when a person gets on the bus, chances are very, very good that the person driving that bus will be able to do whatever is necessary to see that the person goes where he wants to go. For example, Paul Touchette out in Massachusetts developed a program where he found some interesting things. He found that profoundly retarded persons living in an institution, that when you take them out into a city, they exhibit some pretty bizarre behaviors. But if before you do that, you put them through match-to-sample problems with photographs of the places where they're going to be, that they seem to have at least an initial familiarity or something, and the bizarre behavior isn't very much there. And they're capable of learning to recognize photographs. So we're going to capitalize on Paul Touchette's finding. And one of the things we might do is to train persons who find it difficult to learn to be able to recognize photographs of where they want to be. And to take bus drivers and to give each bus its own little folder of pictures, a photograph of each one of its stops, so that a person could be trained to walk onto a bus, point to the little book, be handed the book, go through it, and touch. And that's the place he wants to get off. Have programs designed to train personnel in law enforcement, in hospitals, doctors, grocers, and other people, so that the training that's done with people with severe handicapping conditions is paralleled by the connector training for where they're going to do that stuff. Now, I've learned that until a contract is signed, you don't have it. Okay? So that contract isn't signed yet. But if it goes, there will be personnel sifting throughout the entire place, which happens to be Mexico City, attempting to institute some procedures that are a little difficult in this country right now because there's so many buildings that people spend so much money on, and it just hurts too bad to say, why didn't you spend that money on staff? So that's another one of our things that we're into. Another one, which may interest some of you very much, is that we are now beginning an industrial division. Some of you may have noticed the gentleman sitting up in the front here. His name is Chuck Gold. We're related by marriage. His mother and my father were married. He's a research and design engineer for a very large electronics company and has been taking notes and bugging me in the evening when I didn't want to talk shop to say, why did you say this and what about that? Because it looks like he is going to be applying everything he knows about electronics engineering to everything that our current staff knows about people assembling electronics and to contracting and things. And the industrial division, which he's going to be very much involved with, is going to provide a service that we've done a little bit, but never full-blown like we're going to. We will be involved in such things as acquiring large assembly contracts from the electronics industry and then subcontracting them out to agencies that have already got reliable, consistent training going on. Okay? It's a carrot. And so it's an invitation. It's an invitation that says that within the next year, those of you that can show that you've got good, solid training procedures going on will be in a position, if you want to be, to say, how about filling our place up with electronics work? And we just may be able to do that. The other thing we're going to be doing is to work very closely with industry to train industrial staffs in providing answers to Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And that is to show industries how to train individuals that have been labeled handicapped to successfully work in their factories. That division, in conjunction with the projects that we have, which is to go in and train people, will probably result in combination contracts of providing training of staff for training of clients and all of the industrial consulting and procurement kinds of things for then backing that up with electronics and other kinds of contracts and things. Those of you that are interested in that kind of a thing might wish to contact us. I told you that this is the first time I've done anything like a sales pitch. I feel a little uncomfortable about it. On the other hand, because you didn't come here for a sales pitch. On the other hand, I feel very good about it and comfortable because what we're trying to do is to fill in some of the gaps that everybody has been saying have to be filled and nobody's been filling. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with it. To close for the issue on rules, let me say that these rules are things that you need to look at, try, re-look at, ask questions, call and ask if you want to. Remember that sometimes you just can't even use them if you want to, and other times you can. Okay? Remember that you have evaluations. For those of you that find it necessary to leave, please do that just before you do. For those that stay, I'd encourage you to stay, by the way. This afternoon, we get into talking revolution, into my rule of revolution, which you also don't see in the list of rules. We may be talking about things like Jesus, masturbation, killing executive directors, Okay? No, 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 no. Killing the staff if you're the executive director. We're going to get into some interesting stuff this afternoon and have a nice lunch.